Have you ever wondered why the world's geopolitical landscape resembles a high-stakes chess game, with nations vying for power and influence? Let's peel back the layers of the intricate geopolitical chessboard and delve into the maneuvers of key players such as Russia and NATO. Douglas Macgregor, a renowned political analyst, offers an intriguing perspective. He posits that Putin and his advisors never sought a conflict with NATO or the United States from the get-go. This theory provides a plausible explanation for the gradual escalation of defensive maneuvers over time, eventually leading to sustained offensive actions. With a formidable force of over 300,000 combat troops in reserve, it's puzzling why Putin hesitates to deploy them. Could it be that he anticipates potential Western intervention in Western Ukraine? Such a move could trigger dire consequences for NATO and the United States, given their levels of readiness to confront Russian forces. The geopolitical chessboard isn't merely about the pieces in play, but also about the players themselves. Take, for instance, President Biden, whose perspective often seems to be clouded by confusion. This is not uncommon in Washington, where views on history can often be peculiar. Reflecting on history, it's worth noting that during Eisenhower's presidency, he advocated for the neutrality of Baltic states, Poland, and what was once known as Czechoslovakia, among others. Eisenhower refrained from making commitments regarding Eastern Europe. The NATO treaty does not impose any obligation on us concerning Ukraine, nor should it. If there is any obligation, it's a moral one to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine. But here's the kicker. It seems the war has already been lost. For months, the Russians continue to advance, inching closer to the river. They will likely make the decision to cross it, potentially targeting Odessa. The notion of halting their progress is nonsensical. Is it possible that Putin's hesitance to deploy his reserve forces stems from a fear of potential Western intervention? As we peel back the layers of the geopolitical chessboard, the answers may lie not just in the moves, but in the players themselves. Do you believe history has a peculiar way of repeating itself, especially when viewed from Washington? History can be a profound teacher, offering lessons that echo through the ages. Let's take a step back in time to Eisenhower's presidency. Eisenhower, keenly aware of the complexities of global politics, advocated for the neutrality of the Baltic states, Poland, and what was once known as Czechoslovakia, among others. He refrained from making commitments regarding Eastern Europe, a strategy that resonates with today's complex geopolitical landscape. The NATO treaty, a cornerstone of Western defense, does not obligate the United States or its allies to intervene in Ukraine. Yet, the moral obligation to end the conflict in Ukraine is a weighty one. It's a balance between the practicalities of geopolitics and the human cost of war. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of this conflict, we see a gradual escalation of defensive maneuvers over time, culminating in sustained offensive actions. Putin, with over 300,000 combat troops in reserve, appears to hesitate to deploy them fully, anticipating potential Western intervention in Western Ukraine. Such a move could provoke dire consequences for NATO and the United States, given their current state of readiness to confront Russian forces. It's worth noting that the war has already been lost for months. The Russians continue to advance, inching closer to the river, and they may soon decide to cross it, potentially targeting Odessa. The idea of halting their progress seems nonsensical now. Could we have intervened and resolved the situation earlier, around the end of March or the beginning of April, with a settlement that could have halted this catastrophe? As we sit and ponder these questions, we are left with the sobering realization that our actions, or lack thereof, have not only prolonged but also exacerbated the crisis. Could the war have been resolved earlier, or was it destined to escalate to its current state? As we continue to tread the murky waters of geopolitics, we must remember that history often echoes in the present, offering lessons for those brave enough to listen. Who stands at the epicenter of this turmoil, and are they truly what they seem? Let's explore the individual often portrayed as the architect of the conflict in Ukraine, Zelensky. He's been painted as the mastermind behind the devastation, but is this an accurate depiction? Born and raised in the eastern regions of the country, Zelensky's early life is steeped in Russian culture. From the language he spoke as a child to the traditions he grew up with, his roots are deeply tied to Russia. This has raised questions about his true allegiance. Can someone with such strong connections to Russia genuinely prioritize Ukraine's interests? The plot thickens when we consider the allegations of Zelensky being a mere puppet, a figurehead chosen and installed by powerful forces. Oligarch Kisi is often named as the puppet master, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Backed by influential figures like Nuland, Zelensky's rise to power is seen by some as a carefully orchestrated move. But let's take a step back. Is it fair to blame one man for the chaos and destruction that has gripped a nation? While Zelensky's actions and decisions undoubtedly play a role in the current state of affairs, the conflict is a complex web of historical tensions, geopolitical ambitions, and power struggles. It's a stage on which Zelensky is just one actor, albeit a significant one. Moreover, it's worth considering the motivations behind his portrayal as the villain of the piece. Could this narrative serve to distract from the failures of others, to deflect blame and responsibility? It's a possibility we cannot ignore. As we peel back the layers of this conflict, we're confronted with a sobering reality. The face of the conflict may not be the true source of the turmoil. Instead, it could be a mask, a convenient scapegoat in a much larger and more complex game of power and control. Does Zelensky's background and perceived allegiance play a significant role in the unfolding conflict? It's a question that remains open to interpretation and one that we must continue to explore as events unfold. How are the globalist elites in both Western and Eastern Europe coping with this crisis? Let's delve into the struggles of leadership amidst the convoluted geopolitical landscape. Leaders like France's Macron and Germany's Schulz are grappling with a tempest of challenges. Widespread criticism and diminishing support have become common threads in their political tapestry. The once strong pillars of their leadership are now wavering, and their political capital is dwindling. In an attempt to steady the ship, these leaders are resorting to an age-old political maneuver, fabricating external threats. They've positioned themselves as the saviors, the ones who will steer their nations away from these conjured threats. Yet the cracks in this facade are becoming increasingly evident to the public eye. Take Macron, for instance. His leadership is facing an onslaught of criticism. The French military, a vital backbone of the nation, has expressed its reservations about involving itself in the Ukraine conflict. They recognize their limitations and the potential fallout of such a decision. This stark reality is at odds with Macron's narrative, and the dissonance is causing a rift. Likewise, Schulz in Germany is encountering his own share of troubles. His attempts to maintain power are being met with skepticism and weakening support. The idea of Germany intervening in the Ukraine conflict is seen as unrealistic and impractical, a sentiment that echoes across European militaries. These leaders, in their scramble to retain power, are using the crisis as a tool. They are peddling fear, conjuring threats, and portraying themselves as the solution. But the public isn't easily swayed. The gap between the narrative and reality is widening, and the people are taking notice. This begs the question, are these leaders merely capitalizing on the crisis to prolong their grip on power? The answer isn't clear-cut, but one thing remains certain. Leadership in these trying times is a tightrope walk, and the fall can be steep. Is military intervention in Ukraine a realistic and practical option for European militaries? In the grand theater of international politics, every move reverberates with consequences. The notion of military intervention in Ukraine, for instance, has been a topic of significant debate among European military forces. And it's not just a matter of logistics and manpower, it's a complex web of geopolitical considerations, strategic implications, and potential ramifications. Take the French military, for example. Their leadership has been vocal about acknowledging their limitations. The idea of deploying troops to Ukraine isn't just daunting, it's seen as unfeasible. The stakes are high, the challenges are manifold, and the potential blowback is enormous. It's a sentiment echoed by other European militaries, a collective hesitation born out of a keen understanding of the intricate dynamics at play. But why is there such reticence to intervene? Isn't there a moral obligation to step in, to halt the conflict, to restore peace? Well, it's not that simple. Military intervention isn't just about sending troops into the fray, it's about the aftermath, the long-term commitment, the rebuilding, the potential for further escalation. It's a Pandora's box that, once opened, can't be easily closed. And then there's the question of the political narrative. Leaders in their quest to maintain power often paint a picture of external threats, positioning themselves as the saviors. They churn out rhetoric designed to stoke fear, to rally support, to strengthen their grip on power. But is it all just a facade, a smokescreen to mask the real issues, to divert attention from their failings? The reality is, intervention in Ukraine isn't just impractical, it's unrealistic. It's a move fraught with risks, a gamble that could potentially destabilize the already precarious balance of power. It's a decision that should not be taken lightly, a step that requires careful consideration and strategic foresight. In the face of an escalating crisis, the rhetoric, the posturing, and the grandstanding can create a false sense of security. But the question remains, could the current rhetoric be merely a smokescreen to create a false sense of security in the face of an escalating crisis?